Hello and welcome to the CNBC Africa special broadcast. I'm Chris Bishop. Now today we're talking about the national power generator of South Africa, Eskom, its trials and its troubles. Among them, trying to keep the lights on and also its ambitious expansion program. More of this later in the program, but first we look at Eskom's pricing model, the difficulties of setting electricity prices and the impact on the economy, how it all reflects on Eskom's ability to borrow on the international capital markets. Now joining me in the studio are Cas Coovadia, the acting CEO of Business Unity South Africa, Tony Stott, Senior Manager at Eskom's Generation Division, Sean Friend, Portfolio Manager for the Ideas Managed Fund at Old Mutual Investment Group's Alternatives Boutique. Also in the studio is Lucky Pane, winner of the Old Mutual Nedbank budget speech competition, which posed the question of managing Eskom's price increases. Now, it's a very difficult, been a very controversial subject down the years. Sean, perhaps if you could just outline to us and set us a framework, what are the difficulties with the pricing of electricity by Eskom?
Yeah, look, as Ant will tell us, the issue with pricing electricity is being reflective of the cost of electricity, and that's where the man in the street and the consumer feels it the most. But the real impact, and what I think we're trying to get to today, is the impact on the economy, and security of supply is the major issue that we have from an economic perspective. So mines right now often running on diesel generators when they should be obtaining supply from Eskom or from IPPs. So the solution in a nutshell, I think is greater involvement from the private sector. We've got the ability to raise more capital. We've also got the ability to introduce competition into the generation market. And I think in that very short term, the baseload program and the renewables program have proven that we can add to the supply. And by solving the supply issues, I think we solve the overall electrical crisis issues.
So Cas, I mean, even taking into account that South Africa's still near the bottom of the league table in terms of cost of electricity in the world terms, I mean, we're still paying a lot less here than the rest of the world. How concerned is business about the rising price of electricity?
Well, obviously business would be concerned about any rising sort of input costs into business. But having said that, I think that you know, when Brian came to speak to us just before he left, the sort of discussion we had is that consistency of supply is a critical issue. I think if we have to balance these things, higher cost of electricity to actually ensure consistent supply against the impact on business of ongoing blackouts and collapses, I think it's a no-brainer, to be quite honest. But I think the discussion we need to have, I agree. I think on the supply side, the renewable energy tranches have gone very well. There's a demand for it. I think on the supply side, the private sector can play a far more active role if the conditions are created for that. Obviously, they'll come in if the price is right. So there too, while on the one hand we might say that we need to be careful about increases, on the other hand we're also saying that for IPPs and private sector to come in, it's got to make sense. I think the discussion we need to have is how best do we manage this. I think the private sector needs to understand that we need to restructure the way we're doing business to actually accommodate this. Government needs to understand that they need to create the environment for the private sector to actually play a greater role in supply.
Tony Stott, you're here on this program to speak for Eskom. It's a very difficult problem for you in the fact that most people, including myself, I don't wish to pay any more money for electricity than I am, but in many ways it would be in the interests of long-term supply if people did pay more. How difficult is it for Eskom to carry on with the prices now?
Chris, it's extremely difficult for Eskom. We applied for 16% from the regulator, we got 8%. And that meant that we have to find about 280 billion rand that effectively we won't get through the revenue. And we have got a very big program inside Eskom of how do we cut back on our costs, how do we become more efficient, but you can only increase efficiency by so much, and then you have to start cutting back on electricity. What Eskom is looking for is a cost-reflective tariff, and we're definitely not there yet. We certainly understand that you can't just keep increasing prices of electricity ad infinitum. Certainly, and also as a private individual, I also need to be paying for electricity that is a reasonable price. But at the moment, it is very difficult for Eskom to continue to be an efficient business, to keep the lights on, but still to all do that within contained costs.
And Lucky Pane, now you wrote an award-winning paper about Eskom's pricing, and you believe that it should be looking at perhaps lower costing structures than it is now. What do you say?
Actually, okay, in my essay, what I was actually saying is that higher electricity prices combined with electricity supply constraints have adverse effects on business, particularly in mining and manufacturing, which are quite electricity intensive. So by actually introducing more gradual increases, that will enable business to actually plan their production process and try to get in technologies that are more efficient. And in that way, we can limit the adverse effects of steep electricity increases.
But Tony, if I could go straight back to you. Sorry, Sean.
If I could break in there.
Yes, okay.
Look, I mean, in certain respects, and I know Lucky's won a prize from Old Mutual, but in certain respects, it is a zero-sum game. If we're going to reduce tariffs for somebody, that's got to be picked up by somebody else. And what we need to be focusing on is the long-run best price for the country as a whole. So I don't think a job created in the service sector is different to a job created in manufacturing.
Tony, I mean, straight back to you. The great conundrum you face, and one of my favourite analysts said to me recently, he said, you applied for 16% with the regulator NERSA. You got 8% because perhaps politically it's not very popular to give a 16%. And then the regulator says to you, well, best of luck. I hope you have a good time trying to create electricity with your 8%. But what do you think should be done looking to the future?
We certainly engaging with the regulator, but also engaging with government. And the point was made earlier that it's not only an Eskom problem. It is in fact a problem that the country as a whole must solve. Certainly more independent power producers, Eskom very much welcomes that. Again, because we don't feel that this is Eskom's problem alone. It needs to be a national problem. And we need to find ways where, on the one hand, as consumers of electricity, we can be a lot more efficient in how we use electricity, not to waste it, and therefore contain the rate of increase in the demand for electricity. On the other hand, Eskom itself needs to become even more efficient. As I said earlier, you can only take efficiency up to a certain point, and then we've got to find more innovative ways of achieving our goals at a lower cost. So we've got to find ways to reduce our costs, and we are already cutting out costs where previously we engaged in certain activities. Now we're just saying, no, we can't afford to do those activities now. At some stage in the future, we will have to resume those activities again, but that's in the future. We're facing a shortage now, we're facing the crisis now, and it will continue for at least another 2 years. So we have to focus on these 2 years, and those things that we're cutting back now and say, well, effectively we must postpone them for 3 or 4 years. I'm not talking about maintenance. Maintenance is critical. We have to continue the maintenance of all our infrastructure.
I mean, Cas, you touched earlier on the idea of private money coming in to generation. We'll talk more about it in the second half, but surely the low price of electricity where we are relatively low, isn't that a discouragement for investment? Yeah,
I think intuitively it's a discouragement, but I think like so many other conversations we have, I'm not convinced we're talking about the right stuff. It's not Eskom wanting to put up prices and a knee-jerk reaction to say, well, you shouldn't be putting up prices, or this is what the price should be. I think it is a national issue. I think that business, Eskom, government, and other stakeholders should be sitting down to say, firstly, Eskom needs to convince us. I accept there's cost-cutting efficiencies and so on. I think Eskom needs to convince the public that they are doing their bit to be efficient. Secondly, I mean, let's accept the fact. I'm told that the newest power station we have beside the one that's being built are about 27 years old. Okay, we have old assets. We need to build more assets. So I think that let's have the discussion to say, first let's accept that we need to build assets. We need more capacity. Let's then discuss what part Eskom can fill with the current build programs, how private sector can come to the party, what private sector needs, and what sort of legislative environment we need. I mean, one of the things Brian told us at that time, maybe because it was his last week at Eskom, he was quite frank to say that Eskom's mandate is sustainability. It's not to keep the lights on. Now, is that the correct mandate? Okay. Are there regulatory issues that business and Eskom should be looking at together and lobbying government together? So I think that up to now, I think it's been a sort of trade-off between Eskom and the private sector. I think what we need to do is we need to get together and have the right discussions and make the necessary compromises where those are appropriate.
Lucky Pane, I mean, based on your research, what do you think?
I think one thing that we can, as a country, look at is more on the efficiency. As it was highlighted earlier, we can actually make quite good gains by being more electricity efficient. For instance, by introducing electricity efficient appliances and also requirements in terms of new buildings that are coming in. Maybe if we introduced more electricity efficient requirements for new buildings, that does go a long way in saving electricity. Demand management programs, they contribute to more efficiency. So I think those are some of the things that we can look at as a country, given the crisis that we find ourselves in.
So Tony, what of the future? Do you think it's too much to say that maybe the government should change the laws to say if you've got a new office building, you should have solar panels, you should have the whole lot? Do you think that's too much?
No, it's definitely not too much. Absolutely, we need regulations that require when you're building new infrastructure, new commercial buildings, even new factories and houses, that you do incorporate energy efficiency designs into those buildings. We definitely need that. But in addition, we need to look at, and as Lucky mentioned, our demand profile for electricity. The 2 hours peak demand, especially in winter, Eskom has to keep additional power stations running just for those 2 hours. If we can find a way to level or reduce those peaks, that can certainly help with the supply-demand conundrum that we've got at the moment.
Okay, gentlemen, hold those thoughts there. It's time for a short ad break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about expansion of Eskom in the future. Please stay with us. Welcome back. I'm Chris Bishop, and you're watching the CNBC Africa special report, where we're discussing the implications that Eskom's tariff increases would have on the group's growth strategy, as well as on the South African economy. Now, Tony, to start with you on behalf of Eskom, the great target that's bandied around is 80,000 megawatts, which is almost double what we have now by 2030. Is it possible? That's what everybody's asking.
Chris, you're referring to the integrated resource plan that assumed certain growth scenarios, and you're right. Effectively, by 2030, we need to double the current capacity in South Africa. Now, what is part of that integrated resource plan is that it's not only Eskom doing that. Eskom's expected to do a big part of that, but it's also independent power producers. Part of the discussion that we had earlier, and that what Cas was mentioning about bringing the private sector into the generation of electricity as well. It is feasible. Eskom has plans to build at least 10,000, between 10 and 12,000 just from the Medupi and the Kusile plant in the next 5 to 6 years. But beyond that, we have to look. Now, the Minister of Energy has made certain determinations about renewable energy, but the determinations about the other technologies, nuclear, more coal, if we have more coal, other energy sources, the minister still has to make those determinations. So, and the determination means which entity is going to build those and actually supply electricity from those other sources of electricity.
So, Cas, how confident or otherwise is business? A lot of people I know who are in the know about the power business here say that the industry is in catch-up and it will remain so for decades to come.
I think we are in catch-up given the situation, but I think there is a seriousness in business to look at alternative supply sources. I think there is a seriousness in business to come to the party, and I think that it's not that we'll catch up, but I think that we can make a significant movement forward if we look at this more holistically and government appreciates that, one, they need to send out messages that are certain and that they keep the course. Determinations like these, I think, need to be made sooner rather than later. And we need to work together to actually see how best we move forward. So I think that while there are views in business that we're playing catch up all the time, I think that's not a, we can't keep on saying that. We need to put our heads together and move forward. And I think that if we see this as a national issue and a national emergency and not work in our little pockets, I think that we can make some strides.
Sean.
Yeah, Cas has talked about the big conversations we have to have. I think what we're not looking at, the big conversation we must decide and what we must have is whether we go for nuclear or whether we don't go for nuclear.
Yeah.
So we've got the baseload program coming out. That's got the ability to add 10,000 megawatts. We've got Medupi and Kusile coming online. That can add 10,000 megawatts. Renewables can probably add 5,000 to 10,000 on themselves. And then beyond that, we've got the question of trusting our neighbors or trusting foreigners. So we can either procure hydro capacity from Central Africa, from Zambia, Mozambique, and we can procure gas, which complements renewables very well, from Mozambique and potentially offshore in South Africa. But the alternative to that is to go for the safe option of nuclear. And we need to take into account that nuclear is not cheap. So in the IRP, it's forecasted around 50 per kilowatt hour, whereas pretty much every other technology is a rand per kilowatt hour. So you're looking at a 50-cent premium for nuclear, for the certainty of nuclear. And I can understand when you're sitting in government, if you're the Minister of Energy, you want to opt for certainty because nobody loses their job for certainty. But as Lucky's rightly pointed out in his research, we can't afford to pay 50% more for electricity just for that safe option.
So, Lucky, what do you think is the answer? Are you bearing that in mind, what has just been said?
I just wanted to touch on the infrastructure expenditure. I agree with everyone that as a country, we really need the expansion, especially given the fact that we're also seeing a rise in unplanned outages from the old power stations. So that in itself is an indication that we need to be investing more in infrastructure.
Well, in terms of generation, Tony, which I know is your particular area, I ask you perhaps to have a look at a radical solution to it. We look north to Nigeria, what's happened there? There was a powerless power grid for many, many, many years run by the government. All of a sudden, they've opened up almost overnight to private money, and the whole grid is going to take off. I wrote an article recently saying, why not South Africa? Why not Zimbabwe? Why not Mozambique? And go the same route. What do you think?
I think you can go to, let's say, privatization of the whole system when you're not in a crisis situation. When you're in a crisis situation, then it's incumbent on government to keep the stability, to keep the lights, the supply of electricity and the distribution and transmission of electricity to the customers. So I don't think the time is right now to be considering privatization of everything. But in the long term, it certainly can be something that looks.
But you could argue that Nigeria was in the biggest crisis on the continent when it came to power. What do you think?
And look, I don't think it's a question of whether you privatize or not. It's a question of how do we most effectively use the resources we have in this country between Eskom and the private sector. And what sort of regulatory environment do we need to unlock those resources in a sustainable way? And that's where the debate has got to be. Let's not get into, the moment we talk privatization, this, that, and the other, we get into a political slanging match, which I don't think is useful. I don't think business is taking the view that state-owned institutions cannot work. The thing is that state-owned institutions need to be efficient, and they need to be transparent, and they need to use taxpayers' money well. The debate has got to be, we've got a resource in Eskom that needs some work. We've got resources in the private sector potentially that could come to the party. How do we optimize those resources, and what sort of environment do we need to do?
Again, you know, business needs stability. A pure privatization, unpacking of the industry, you know, a pure merchant market would actually be difficult for investors like us. If we want to attract investors the way we have, believe it or not, our government's on the right track. So, and they've been very astute in the procurement that they've done. So, the renewables program has raised more than 100 billion rand. It's you know, the state-led market that we've got is really not a bad model. But we do need to leverage the private sector to its full capacity.
I mean, Lucky, with this renewables, which is the big talk of the moment now, I mean, how confident are you otherwise, looking at it, that it could be the future?
Government has actually signed off about 64 renewable projects, and about 19 of them have already contributed to the national grid. So I think that is the way to go. We actually do need the private sector, because Eskom cannot do it by itself.
Cas, what kind of appetite are you seeing in the private companies that you're dealing with for this kind of business?
Well, I think the renewable project is an indication of the sort of appetite. There's been tremendous appetite for it, and we absolutely convinced that if we, and it goes for the broader infrastructure program, if we package these things well, there's transparency, there's decisions taken and staying the course, I think there's appetite for the private sector. And I mean, if you look at banks, for instance, they're doing a whole lot of infrastructure financing on the continent outside of South Africa. We need to get that done here, and I think it's happening there because there's certainty, it's open for business. The environment is being created to do that, and we can do that here. So I think the appetite is there. I mean, business is there for business. And if there's a good business opportunity, the appetite will be there, and I think there can be a good business opportunity.
Tony, do you think the national power generator can open the gate any wider, you think? I mean, a lot of people in the private sector still say that Eskom is still a player and the referee on the same pitch.
No, Eskom's certainly a player, but we're not at all the referee. The referee is between the regulator, NERSA, and the Department of Energy, very definitely. And I think, yes, the Minister of Energy has indicated that he will be, in fact, perhaps as early as next week, making some more determinations. Not the big one on nuclear that we were hoping for, but some of the other programs, the medium-term and the smaller short-term programs. So yes, it can be opened up more, and I think that's right. We need to look at what is in the best interest of South Africa.
And the actual expansion program itself, there's been a lot of delays at Medupi and Kusile that you talked about. How confident or otherwise are you that Eskom can deliver in time?
Eskom is confident that the first unit of Medupi will come on stream. We'll start generating electricity towards the end of the year, and soon thereafter going to full commercial operation. And every 6 to 8 months thereafter, additional units will come online. So, as Sean said, another 10,000 megawatts between Medupi and Kusile in the next 2 years.
Okay, well, coming to near the end of the show, I'd just like you to just wrap up your closing thoughts, starting with you, Lucky Pane.
All right, I would say that as a country, we really need to be working together. It's not just Eskom's problem, but the economy is also at stake. We're experiencing weak growth, and electricity shortages are contributing to that. So if business as well as government together with Eskom can work together, we can come out of this much stronger.
Sean?
Yeah, Chris, we haven't touched on Eskom's balance sheet, which I thought we'd spend the whole show on. 400 or 500 billion that they've raised currently, that balance sheet is stretched. So if we can raise 200-300 billion through the private sector, and achieve cost-reflective tariffs as a country. And I know it's difficult, and I know it may involve the Bishop household getting a solar geyser, but I think that's the way to go.
Mentioned the balance sheet there, taking that into consideration. How do you see the future?
The future is not all dire and sort of doom and gloom. We have a lot of work to do in Eskom, but collectively also with the private sector and South Africa as a whole. Energy efficiency, in our own homes, in our businesses, is definitely the cheapest way to, in fact, resolve the problem, but it can only take you so far. And then, yes, following up on what Sean was saying, for Eskom to be able to have a good credit rating, to be able to borrow money on the international markets, we need to be able to prove that we have the revenue to repay those loans. So there's money out there, but all the investors wanted to know is how are you going to repay your loans? What's the revenue going to be that enables you to do that?
Cas?
Yeah, look, I think we just need to take a decision as a country, and we mustn't prevaricate on this, that Eskom is not the only show in town, that Eskom together with the private sector can actually make significant progress and can knock this problem over a period of time. But we need to take that decision, we need to send out that message, we need to create the environment for us to all work together, and then let's get going. But we need to be absolutely clear on that.
Thank you very much. Cas Coovadia, the acting chairman of Business Unity South Africa, Tony Stott from Eskom, Sean Friend from Old Mutual, and Lucky Pane, the man with the golden pen who won the Old Mutual essay competition. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. From me, from this special CNBC Africa debate, from me, Chris Bishop, it's goodbye.